Welcome. We're glad you're here. My name is Eric White. I am the Adult Services Librarian at the Estes Valley Library. Welcome to the grand finale of our One Book, One Valley series. A little bit about One Book, One Valley. Every year, we in the Estes Valley celebrate community and literacy by coming together in conversation around a single book. This year, that book is The Stranger in the Woods, The Extraordinary Tale of the Last True Hermit by Michael Finkel. I'll introduce Michael momentarily, but first I just wanted to give our usual disclaimer. We'd like to remind everyone that the library sees part of its job as bringing in speakers to share their own perspectives for the enrichment of the community. Speakers' perspectives are purely their own. We don't tell them what to say, and we don't think you'd want us to. All right, now I'd like to introduce tonight's guest. Michael Finkel is the author of the New York Times bestsellers The Stranger in the Woods and The Art Thief, as well as the book True Story about Finkel's bizarre and unhealthy friendship with a murderer, which was adapted into a 2015 major motion picture starring James Franco and Jonah Hill. Finkel has reported from more than 50 countries across 6 continents, covering topics ranging from the world's last hunter-gatherer tribes to conflicts in Afghanistan and Israel to theoretical physics. His work has appeared in National Geographic, GQ, The Atlantic, Esquire, Rolling Stone, Vanity Fair, and the New York Times Magazine. He has been anthologized in The Best American Sports Writing, The Best American Science and Nature Writing, and The Best American Travel Writing. In the line of repertorial duty, Finkel has skied off the summit of Mount Kilimanjaro, stowed away on a Haitian refugee boat, joined a cult in Colorado, and hitchhiked across the Sahara Desert. He lives with his wife and 3 children in northern Utah. Please welcome Michael Finkel. Welcome to camp.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. I don't think I've been in Estes Park in a long time, and I can't believe all of you came out in January in a slight blizzard. I feel a lot of pressure. And also, by the way, I almost didn't make it here. This is a great town, but what is up with the construction? So my GPS took me to that roundabout, and then a cop, I'm glad I'm not in jail. A cop came in right behind me, and it kept saying, "No, turn around, turn around." I went 3 times around the roundabout, and I was like, I got to pull over. I was very nervous about this, but other than that perfectly ill-placed construction, what a beautiful town. I got to take a little stroll in Rocky Mountain National Park today with nobody. I was ready to move in for 27 years. Thank you, Eric, for that ridiculously kind introduction. Thanks to everyone who voted for the Stranger in the Woods, and I forgive you for those who didn't. Let's see what happens. Right. We haven't rehearsed too much, but we got plans for stuff. All right, I think I'm gonna...
Speaking of that, I just want to mention that a few days ago, a patron dropped off the study guide to The Stranger in the Woods at the library. Just maybe so that, we do a good job here. So no pressure.
Do we really need the Cliff Notes to a 190-page book? I don't.
All right. So let's start by talking a little about what pulled you into the story of Chris Knight.
All right, let's talk about that. But I got to acknowledge this amazing set here. I've done a few talks about this book, but nobody has gone so far into try and replicate the camp. Now, I think Eric's first idea was for everyone to go out in the parking lot in their shirt sleeves and get the real sensation, but we're going to settle for this. Yeah, I don't know if there's any sort of secret sauce for how you find a story. I just rely on sort of journalistic senses. I've had a long career in journalism, 30 years. I've watched the rise and, can we say fall, the rise and stumble of print media. And I thank you all for being readers and coming out here. Yeah, one of the things I like to do when I'm looking for ideas is sort of like, I feel like I'm running my own newsroom, and I just go on the internet and look at small town papers all around, not just the United States, but the world, looking for that sort of story that grabs me, that TV isn't covering, that's not about a famous person. And I did read like a 4-paragraph story in the Kennebec Journal out of Maine. It said something like, a guy was just found who spent 27 years in the woods, not speaking with anyone and stealing books and food, and has finally been captured. I'm like, wait, you gotta tell me more about this. And, that's sort of what sparked my interest. And I'll let you let's see what the next question is.
But what finally moved you to actually write Knight a letter?
I mean, so you hear about a guy who, it's like the first thing you're thinking of is this person crazy? Did this actually happen? Is this just a myth? And I keep scanning the Kennebec Journal, all these things. I just know that this person has been arrested. I wait a month. There's been no news. I called the lawyer. The lawyer's like, he's not going to talk to anyone. And then I'm going to give you my great secret for how to get in touch with someone who might be a little recalcitrant or quiet. And I don't think there's any greater challenge than someone who literally hasn't spoken to someone in a quarter century. How do you get them to talk to you? And I thought, I'm going to write this person a letter. When I was a child, my mom always made me handwrite thank you notes after my birthday party. And I don't think I really liked it, but there's something about handwriting a letter, especially as email and text messages have taken off. I think a handwritten letter makes an impression. And so I have 3 children and I have a noisy house and I love to be outside. And I was just thinking about this guy locked in jail in Maine for breaking and entering. And when I decided to just handwrite him a note, they used to have these things called, maybe some of you, this looks like an older crowd, we heard of envelopes. My children would be like, haven't heard of it, Dad. Stamps, mailboxes. They used to have, anyway, I sat down and wrote a letter. I later talked to Chris Knight's attorney. He said like 500 journalists tried to get in touch with Chris Knight. And I wonder if anybody else wrote with pen, paper on an actual piece of paper. I'm not sure, and that just might be it. Or he just has great taste in journalists, maybe. So I mailed this letter, and I did not expect to hear anything. But tonight, because it's great to have a live audience, we get to see things. I assume that many of you are familiar with the book, so we'll try and do some things that aren't in the book. But 2 weeks after I mailed the letter, this is not a copy. This is the exact envelope that appeared in my mailbox. This exact white envelope appeared. And when I had written this letter to Chris Knight, not only did I say I was from Montana and I liked camping out, but I made sure to tell him that I was a journalist and interested in his article journalistically, and to sort of show my chops and also to have him read something of mine. I sent him a recent National Geographic article that I had written about a tribe called the Hadza in Tanzania. And I wrote the article. I didn't take the beautiful photos, but I made sure to photocopy the beautiful colored photos. And I sent a couple of other articles along with the letter. And again, 2 weeks later, this very thin envelope, it almost looks like a rejection slip, It's like, and you probably can't read it now, but it has Chris Knight, it says, and the return address is the Kennebec County Jail. And there's like this black stamp on the back, which you can't read. It says, Kennebec County Jail, these contents have not been evaluated, basically warning, we don't have any responsibility for what's inside. And I was like, wow, I can't believe I got a note back. And I remember I sat at my desk and I like slit open the envelope and I was wondering what would be inside. What is the person who, says nothing for a quarter century? What's he going to say? And this is what was inside. You guys see this? So what he sent me was one of the photos that I had sent to him. This is Onwas, one of the elders in the Hadza tribe that I had written about for National Geographic magazine. And I remember sitting there at my desk looking at this picture, thinking, oh man. So the man who doesn't say anything for, quarter century responds to a letter without saying anything. But yet he did respond. He sends me this thing and I'm thinking, what does this mean? What's the significance? And I was like, This is really frustrating. I'm already frustrated. And then I turned it over and I saw that he had written a note on the back. And it's a really brief note, maybe 4 paragraphs long. But I knew immediately from reading just a few paragraphs that this was going to be a very rich story. You know, as a writer, I'm a sucker for good writing. And so he had a jaunty style. He also, I didn't know if this guy was just completely insane. And I knew that he had stolen some books and obviously liked to read. And so in my first letter to him, I mentioned that I liked Ernest Hemingway. And, one of the first things he does is like start engaging in a bit of literary criticism. He's like, I've read a few of Hemingway's books and feel rather lukewarm about him. And so, it's got a sense of humor there. And clearly I knew from this first letter that Chris Knight had a very fascinating story to tell. So our relationship started with like an epistolary sort of a back and forth for the course of a summer. And that was how our relationship commenced.
But it ultimately drew you to Maine. And so, yeah, how did you, what prompted you to actually go see him in person?
So we exchanged a few brief letters over the course of the summer. In fact, I thought it was fascinating. Chris Knight wrote to me a few things in verse. He gave me a few little hints that he was, that he wanted to tell me a story. But then he sent me a very heartbreaking letter in which he said, I feel that this is the person I was imagining him always, like this someone who had spent a lot of time in the woods, and whether or not, no matter how we feel about him, he was a thief, someone who had been completely autonomous, out completely in nature, is now literally locked in a cage with another person. That's got to be torturous, especially for someone like Chris Knight, whether or not he deserved it. And he wrote me a letter saying he felt like it was very heartbreaking. He felt like he was losing his sanity more in 2 months after a couple of months in jail than a couple of decades in the woods. And he felt like he didn't have the energy to write. And he sent me a very polite last note saying, like, I think he signed it, your friendly neighborhood hermit. And that seemed to be about it. I sent a few more letters without any reply. And I thought maybe the relationship is done. But I couldn't get him out of my mind. And so I flew from Bozeman, Montana, where I was living, a very Estes Park-esque town. It's colder there. And if anybody has spent any time visiting in jails, it's a very odd experience. You wait in this waiting room and there's a lot of slamming and banging going on. And finally, some guard comes out and he said, "Knight." And I was just sitting there. I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm here to see Knight." And, they give you they want you to see if you have any weapons. I was allowed to bring a pen and a notebook in, and I walked into this visiting room, and it's one of these classic visiting rooms where there's no contact. There's just a thick pane of plexiglass or bulletproof glass and these old-fashioned phone receivers. And there was Knight, Chris Knight, sitting on the other side. And if you read that scene in the book, it was really uncomfortable. One of the things that I think we'll talk about is how comfortable or uncomfortable people are with being alone or being silent. I mean, if I stopped talking, if we all sat here silently for like 1 minute, I mean, I would start fishing out my phone and looking at TikTok videos or something like that. But it's very, it's very uncomfortable. But it took Chris Knight a little while to relax. But then he spoke to me. We never really made eye contact. It was sort of like he looked over my shoulder and I looked over his. But I thought he was beautifully eloquent. I tried to capture his voice a little bit in the book itself, and told me, I really want to thank Chris Knight. I doubt that he is in the audience here, although who knows, he has mysterious ways, but he shared with me probably the most valuable thing he owns, which is his story. I didn't pay him for it. And again, he chose me out of 500 journalists that wanted to talk to him. And I think given his druthers, you might have that question, he probably didn't want to tell his story at all, but he's a super smart person. And I think he realized that if he didn't tell his story, then he was going to get bugged his entire life by people wanting to know it. And that if he chose one person to say what he wanted to say, and in a weird way, he could regain his privacy. Like, this is what I have to say. And I'm somewhat happy to report that as far as I know, that people have left Chris Knight alone. He hasn't become like this object of fascination. Every once in a while, I'll get a email like, give me his address. I want to visit him. And of course, I say I made a deal with Chris and that I wouldn't do that.
And so you visited him like a number of times and spent, was it like 9 hours total, 9 hours per visit? What was that like for you? Did you kind of come in with a set of questions that you wanted to ask him, or did you sort of wing it, or how did that sort of, what was your strategy for interviewing him?
I don't think there's like a handbook for how to interview someone that hasn't spoken in 27 years. And so I remember the very first time I went in there, of course, I was nervous. Yes, I like to prepare for an interview, and I had millions of questions, but really, once you're there in person, you sort of see what the mood is. And I remember that very first visit, I was like, what did you go to the woods? What did you learn? But I could tell that really, for that first visit, we should probably just relax and maybe see how things unfold. So 9 hours does not seem like a very long time. I probably had 100 hours of questions, and maybe people that read the book were thinking there must be some other stories. And I agree with you. And when it comes to nonfiction, and I stress that everything in the book is true as I could possibly make it. I had 2 independent fact checkers check everything, and I got access to almost all the police reports, et cetera. I feel thankful for the amount that Chris Knight did share with me, rather than like wondering what's left out. But I think sort of tucked in between the pages is the sense that there is probably some profound things that happened to Chris Knight that he simply decided not to speak about. And I could tell right away, all my journalistic jujitsu and tricks to get people to open up to me were definitely not going to work. And I really actually sort of enjoyed a couple of things about Chris Knight. First was that absolute lack of gamesmanship. Like, I clearly know that if you don't want to talk, you could go a quarter century. And so I'm not going to try anything. You tell me what you want to tell me. And the second thing I loved about Chris Knight was this sort of lack of filter on his behalf too, where he was like, your author photo looks really nerdy, or Beckett, you named your son Beckett. Oh my God, what a terrible name. I was like, I wonder how many of my friends, when I say my son's name is Beckett, they're like, oh, terrible name. And, but they just think. And so he says the quiet part out loud. And when we were having lunch today with a couple of members of the library, they said, did you feel that Chris Knight was honest with you? And I've spoken to many, many, many people in my life, and I don't think I've ever spoken with someone who I felt was more open and honest than Chris Knight. He did once mention something to the fact that if he's going to bother to talk, he should tell the truth, or he's going to be quiet. And both of the police officers who participated in his arrest echoed those sentiments. And so I found it to be like a very challenging but sort of lovely experience to encounter someone who I didn't like. I even at the end, he's like, I didn't really like hanging out with you, Mike. I'm like, thanks. And so that sort of real openness, I found both I don't know, strangely charming. Like his saltiness appealed to me. I don't know why. I don't recommend just being openly honest at all times. You're at a dinner party. This sucks. Little lies, I think, little white lies get, grease the wheels of society. I think we all lie constantly. You're all going to tell me you had a good time tonight. I don't even know how happy you'll be like, I was bored off my butt. But Chris was missing that sort of gene. And I think that's one of the reasons why he found human interactions so discomforting.
So speaking of, Chris coming back into the world of society and going from being a kind of a myth to being a real person, maybe talk about sort of the legend that was out there about him, and how he ultimately ended up in the Kennebec County Jail.
Right. We have a few slides tonight. And just to add, I'm feeling like people are familiar with the book, so it'd be great to see some new things. And just like 10 minutes ago, I had the whole deck memorized, and now I guess I got nervous. I have no idea what's going on. But I think the first section of slide, let's see what the first slide is. Oh yeah. So where the heck does this take place? I think you guys know where the state of Maine is, in that upper right-hand corner, sort of like should be a Canadian province. And where Chris Knight was right about the letter M in Maine, the Central Lakes region. Let's see what we got next. This is North Pond in the summertime. And you couldn't tell from that previous slide, but all around the shore of North Pond, there are cabins like this. Let's see, I think we have another cabin like this. These are very modest second homes. See what the next slide is. And this is what Chris Knight's woods looked like as I was walking today in Rocky Mountain Park. I was thinking this is not a good woods for a hermit to hide in, just because you have more conifers and it's quite wide open. But the Chris Knight's woods are more deciduous trees and really tightly packed. What's next? Oh, I think this is it. Let's go on to the next one. So, oh yeah, so Chris Knight was like a legend. There was basically, it got to the point on North Pond where there was like the Loch Ness Monster. Let's see what's next. Oh yeah, the Himalayan Yeti and the North Pond Hermit. In fact, it took like 15 years of missing supplies, and like people were not even sure what was going on before someone finally put a video camera inside of a smoke detector and got this photo, which baffled people. This photo was taken, there's this 2011. He wasn't arrested for, I believe, another, like, what was he arrested in? Like
2013?
Yeah, for another couple of years. So this is one of the photos, and it really baffled people because he looks a little chubby there. He's clearly clean shaven. And so after this photo was taken, pretty much the police were sure that it was like some neighbor or someone coming from out of town. And Chris later told me that he purposely dressed and shaved in a way that if he was seen walking in the woods, he would not be thought of as a vagrant or a hermit, which is a word he never used. And so I think we have the pictures of the people. Oh, yeah, this is, I think we're going to come back to Sergeant Terry Hughes in a minute, but I just want to show you some of the people that there's no pictures in the book. So this is Terry Hughes, who after literally like 25 years of this mystery decides he's going to solve it. And if you remember from the book, he put like electric eyes in the pine tree kitchen and practiced his whole crazy run from his house. And I really enjoyed this guy, and we'll if we can get this to work, we'll have a videotape later. And he also took me, Terry Hughes did, to check his muskrat traps. Here I am reporting. I love reporting sometimes. Terry Hughes helped me skin my first ever muskrat. There we go. So, and this is Sergeant Diane Vance. Both of those really serious and really worked on this case for like. It's funny to talk to a police officer about this case because they're like, for 15 years, I thought it was a joke. And it turns out that the legend was true, which rarely happens. I don't think there's actually a Loch Ness Monster or a Himalayan Yeti. I don't want to burst anyone's bubbles. I don't think we're going to find those, but there really was a North Pond Hermit. I wonder what the next slide is. Okay, so yeah, so where was his arrest taken? He was arrested at Prime T Cramp. Let's go. Yeah, this is the dining hall. En suite next. This is the kitchen where he was arrested in. I'm kind of curious what the next slide is too. Oh yeah, so this is what Chris Knight looked like on the day of his arrest, clean shaven, bald. Let's see what the next picture. I think it says that's what he looked like just before his senior year. I think the next is his graduation picture. Okay, so just take a look at these glasses for a second. Look at these glasses closely. Can we back up 2 slides to that earlier one? Oh yeah. Look at those glasses. Let's go next 2 slides up forward, the same pair of glasses. And that was the moment, if you'll recall from the book, that the police officer's demeanor like abruptly changed from this is some weird practical joke to this could possibly be true. And okay, so this is what Chris Knight looked like when I interviewed him in jail. So let's back it up 3 slides to his bald one. So one more. So when Chris Knight was a hermit, he looked nothing like a hermit. And when he was no longer a hermit, let's go 3 forward, he looked exactly like a hermit. And he always, he had this bone dry sense of humor, where that was sort of his practical joke. He's like, if everyone, he never actually thought of himself as a hermit. He's like, if anyone wants to see a hermit, I've decided to show them a hermit.
All right. So, oh, I thought that, oh, never mind. I thought that was going to end with the picture of him and his site. I was going to say, the officers took you to his site. Or did they, or you found it on your own?
So Chris Knight, if you may recall from the book, I'm used to talking to people, to an audience that hasn't read the book. So it's kind of, I'm trying my hardest to make sure you get some information that's not in the pages. But so Chris Knight, if you'll recall, left the world at age 20. That's a young hermit. I usually think of hermits as old, and wandered around for about a year and a half, sort of working his way through Maine until he found his, what he called his like perfect spot, his campsite. And I had so many questions. It was in, how could you possibly live? It was in private property in like a rural neighborhood, but there's a couple hundred of those cabins around. Like, how is it possible that no one could have found him? Like, of course, how do you not see a doctor in 27 years? Like all these questions. But I really, and when I was talking to Chris Knight in jail through those staticky phones in the visiting room, he said, he kept saying he never lit a fire. And I say, I don't know if I believe that. No fire. I mean, let's go outside for like an hour, let alone a day, let alone a week, let alone a winter, let alone 27 of them. Maybe, no one would be happy. And he kept saying, well, go to my site and find it. And the night Chris Knight was arrested, he did guide the 2 officers to his site. And as far as anybody knows, that's the only time he ever showed anyone where his site was. And one of the local, like, I would actually think this is in the book. One of the local handyman followed like the police officer's footprints through the snow and found the site. And then I talked to him, and the officers said it was on private property. They didn't want to let me know where it was. And I'm thinking, someone lives on this property for 27 years without being discovered. I think I could walk on it too. And the handyman says, I think this part's in the book. He's like, go onto this driveway, which he showed me, and we'll see some slides. And when the sun's setting, follow the setting sun up the hill and you'll find the site. That's about as cryptic as it gets. And let's see what the next slide is. And we'll walk our way through. Okay, yeah, so the very first time I went to Chris Knight's site, I took a bunch of photos, and it happened to be, this is later in the season than you might imagine. I don't know when the ponds start melting out here, but in central Maine, this is probably late March, early April, and I'm sure it's similar here. This is North Pond. You saw it in summer. Let's go to the next one. This is the last driveway that I was told to enter the woods and follow the setting sun. As I mentioned before, all of this took place on private property. And the woods are I have never gotten so disoriented in my entire life. It was so challenging. Not only the trees thick, but the entire region is carpeted with these enormous glacially deposited boulders after the last ice age. The glaciers went right through Maine, and when they receded, they left all these rocks behind. And it's so thick that not even, I talked to a bunch of deer hunters. I was like, someone must have come across this camp. And all the hunters were like, no deer go through there. So it's too thick for even deer to wander through. Occasionally one will, but really it's impenetrable. And let's see what we got here. We have more thick woods. Is it little bit different seasons? It's just things I spotted while looking for his site various times. Okay, so yeah, so the rocks in the Maine in Knight's camp, I'm doing a little melange of seasons here. This is obviously summertime, are carpeted with this like inch or two, like a deep pile carpet of moss that are so slippery. We'll go to the next one. And the first time I ever put my boot on it, I completely sliced my hand open. We can look at this blood for a while. And so I have never been more lost. I think the next slide might be about a minute and a half video. If you're we still looking at that bloody thing? Okay. If you recall, Sergeant Hughes, the very serious looking guy, he was in the Marines for many years. This is like a 1.5-minute video, and I don't often videotape interviews, but I did with Sergeant Hughes because he was so fascinating to talk to. But this is a guy who is completely serious, and I just want you to listen for like a 1.5 minutes and just sort of watch his demeanor changes as this very serious officer describes. He's one of the 2 known people who ever walked with night in the woods, what it might be like. And I hope we can all listen to this.
Well, I served 8 years in the Marines, and we spent a lot of time in the woods. We've been in woods service for 18 years, and I've spent a lot of time in the woods. I've tracked hunters, fishermen, trappers, lost people. I've found lost kids, Alzheimer patients. I've conducted several searches over my career where tracking people is of the essence. Being observant in the woods and paying attention if somebody had passed through there or not. I followed this subject after he agreed and consented to take us back to his campsite. We left this facility right here, Pine Tree Camp, for the handicap on foot. We walked down the road and we entered the woods. I followed this subject for 45 minutes right behind him, step for step. Trooper Vance was right behind me. Several occasions I turned around and I pointed out how this suspect took the same steps all the time. If he stepped on a route this morning, he stepped on that same route for the past 20 years. Every step was calculated, every movement, every trail. To find his way back from here to his campsite in the middle of the night with a small pen light is amazing feat in itself. And then not leaving any signs. He didn't touch a limb. He didn't break a twig. He moved zigzag through the woods. It would be nearly impossible to track him based upon the way he moves. He steps on rocks. He avoids snow. He avoids anything that will give any indication that he's been through that area. It was an experience. For 40 minutes. I had the opportunity to walk behind him and to be able to appreciate how he moves through the woods. That's very unique to me as a game warden.
I mean, there's just something, I love listening to that clip because I really love extraordinary people. And he really is like describing like a piece of performance art. I really wish that I could take a hike one day with Chris Knight, and we'll get to, where he is now and why I'm not taking a hike with him, but it's something amazing. And I can tell this is a very outdoorsy crowd. I mean, I think we should all appreciate that for a moment. And besides thanking him for telling his story, it's like one of the questions I think raised by this book, and maybe when we open it up to question and answers, we'll talk about, whether somebody who has an extraordinary set of abilities and things that they like in their life, are they excused from committing crimes? Somewhat, not at all. Like, I would really like to, I don't have a good answer to that. And I think one of the reasons why I really like this story is because it's not clear to me on the pantheon between someone to respect and someone to despise, where Chris Knight lies on that. And no matter where you personally feel he lies in that, I don't disagree with you. You're not wrong at all. Speaking to the homeowners who are traumatized by people breaking in. I have 3 young kids. If someone broke into my house repeatedly, that is not a forgivable sin. You deserve to go to jail. And so it's a very complicated thing. And I do like that. These are pictures that, I didn't put any pictures in the book. Let's quickly go through. So I did find his site. Let's see what the next slide might be. So I want you to look at this picture. This is his site from literally 10 feet away. The next picture is just zoomed in. So let's just look at that for a second. There it is. So this is what his site looked like. And again, if this is made of all stolen materials. Let's cruise through this quickly next. The only thing, Eric, that you didn't do is like spray paint our pots and pans here, I think. But I love this set. You can see that pot right there sitting on top of that propane stove. He'd bring the propane tent in, but it's like painted in camouflage, as are his garbage cans. Let's see what the next slide is. Right, some of the clothing and there's an officer walking through this. Some of the police officers took this photo. Let's see what the next one is. Had a story. He had a bunch of propane tanks. If you'll recall, he liked to steal everything in this that he owned in the entire world, except for his eyeglasses. He did steal. Next, just some more pictures of his camp. That's one of the storage containers he used for rainwater. And then when the rainwater got a little too mucky, he used it for bathing or washing his clothes. That's why his clothes didn't smell and he was able to shave. Let's see what we have. Chris said that his best friend in the woods was this shelf mushroom. It's hard to tell the size from this, but this is almost the size of a dinner plate here. And he said over the course of a couple of decades, he watched it grow from maybe the size of a $50 to this thing. And that is his mushroom. And if you'll recall from the book, one of the most, I don't know about tender or telling moments when I was interviewing him in jail was when I said, I finally found your site. And the one thing he said was, is that shelf mushroom still there? He was concerned that one of the police officers had knocked it down. And I just do love that he seemed to have he wasn't so airy as to say that he had a relationship with this shelf mushroom, but I'm going to say he had a relationship with this shelf mushroom. So hello, shelf mushroom. These are just things that the police officers confiscated from his site, some of his pots and pans. Let's go see his collection of flashlights. There we go. He liked flashlights, if you're living out in the woods. So, he didn't return anything he stole. And so he had a lot of this. These were just the ones that were stashed around his site. Next. Oh, so if you'll recall, he entertained himself by doing mostly nothing, but a lot of reading, occasionally listening to the radio, and then playing on some handheld electronic games. You can see this one in the foreground, and Chris Knight mentioned to me that he had a strict Game Boy stealing policy. He's, both a criminal and a strange sense of morality at the same time. Chris Knight said to me, he didn't want to deprive any children of their Christmas gifts, so he would only steal games that seemed to be 2 generations old. And then he realized that, these more modern ones, he'd be stealing those in a couple of years. So he would get around to the more modern ones. This green Coleman 2-burner stove is his kitchen. And he sat on that green bucket, and mostly he used the stove and the propane for melting snow for drinking water, but also to cook he was not exactly a French chef, if you'll recall. His specialty was macaroni and cheese. It was great that someone ordered macaroni and cheese also today. Let's see what we got next. Oh, so a lot of things were hard to believe about his story, but there were clear signs that he was telling the truth. And one of them is something as subtle as this, that his clothesline, and now this is Maine, like Estes Park, trees do not grow that rapidly. And when the officers, especially Terry Hughes, were noting things, he said that this was one of the signs, besides the glasses, that everything was true, that the tree had grown around the clothesline. And if you'll notice that clothespin just hanging off of that tree, Chris Knight was so careful about maintaining camouflage. I actually took that clothespin. It's right here. That's this exact clothespin, and he painted it green. I just want you to note this attention to detail. Painted the clothespin green. You're welcome to take a look at it a little later. And this is the only existing photo of Chris Knight at his campsite taken by the police officers on the night he was arrested.
So there we see Knight there in his home. Can you talk a little bit about what he experienced there based on your interviews with him?
The topic of the book is basically solitude. And I've always been fascinated by that. I even went on a 10-day silent retreat in India, and I found it to be one of the most difficult things I've ever done. It's weird. Well, it's not weird. Humans, of course, are very social animals. In fact, we're not the strongest animal in the animal kingdom. We're not the fastest. We don't even have the biggest brains. But one thing we do, unlike almost any other, maybe dogs and a few other things, but we really work together. Sometimes we work together terribly. I could think of them, but sometimes we work together really well. It's one of the reasons why humans became the dominant species, that we can link our big brains together and learn how to hunt as groups and gather and, make tribes. We're really
Do author talks,
get people in an auditorium. We really are good at working together. And, but yet, solitude is this very odd condition in which state in which, like, for example, the second most severe punishment you can get in the American penal system, I guess the most severe would be the death penalty. But outside of the death penalty, solitary confinement is considered the harshest non-lethal punishment that we have. In fact, the United Nations says that holding a prisoner for more than 10 days in isolation is considered torture. And so some people find being alone extraordinarily torturous. And yet, just to compile a list of people who spent a long time alone, I'll start with Jesus in the Judean desert, Muhammad in what's now present-day Saudi Arabia, and let's go with the Buddha, who spent time underneath a tree in India. And I think something like 4 billion people follow the religions brought back by those three, basically hermits or people that spent time alone. And so it can be both torture and profoundly rapturous at the same time. And I think if there's anything like working on this book or encountering someone like Chris Knight taught me, is like, I wonder if we as individual people spend enough time alone. And I feel like I'm babbling a little bit, but it is really an important subject to me. Do you mind if I continue a little bit about this? Yeah, just like, if there's anything I learned from working on this book is that it is valuable to know yourself, and a little bit scary too. I mentioned this in the writing, like I started doing this poll where I wondered what the longest time anyone had really ever been alone. And I want us all to think about this for a second. Like, what's the longest time you've ever spent alone? And my ground rules are no texting, no calling anyone, no talking to anyone. You can read a book or watch television, but like literally alone, maybe without even seeing another person. And I felt like 90% of the people I've met have never spent one day alone. My father, who's in his 80s, thought about it and thought about it. He's like, Mike, I don't think I've ever spent 12 waking hours alone. He did grow up in New York City, but still. And then I thought, oh, I'm Mr. Adventurous. I go on solo backpacking trips. I'm Mr. I totally get Chris's 27 years. And then I started thinking about it because, when I'm hiking in a national park in the summer, I stop and chit chat with all the other hikers I see. And I had to scratch my head to find 48 hours that I'd literally been alone. And I thought I was accomplished. And so the thing about Chris Knight is like, he's this crazy outlier beyond. I looked in the history books. I didn't want people to think this is just ridiculous, but I literally could not find, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I couldn't find a known example of someone who was as isolated as Chris Knight in all, like, I'm just going to say this, in all of human history. Now, it doesn't mean it didn't exist, but it hasn't been recorded. And, Chris Knight's plan was to stay out there until he died and never have me sitting on a stage talking about him. Sorry, Chris. But he did, and he did break the law, so sometimes that comes around.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about, or what was interesting to me about his story was that he didn't seem to be conflicted about solitude at all. Like, we had one of our other speakers was Bob Cole, who spent a year on an uninhabited island off the Chilean coast. And, he went into the woods, into solitude to transform his consciousness and struggled mightily. But my impression of Knight is that it wasn't solitude that he struggled with. It was the things that he had to do to maintain his solitude.
I love the way Chris Knight made fun of Thoreau, which like cracked me up. It's like, I was like, hey, you and Henry David Thoreau. And he was like, oh, that dilettante, and the thing, the funny thing is, like, maybe on some layer, if you peel it back, I think the reason why he reacted so negatively to Thoreau is because maybe they have more in common. But let's just think about what Thoreau did. He, went to his cabin for 2 years, had like dinner parties once a week. Literally, Thoreau's mother did his laundry while he was living at, he didn't write about that in Walden. But what's the reason why Thoreau went out in the woods besides, say he even was all by himself for 2 years? You know how he did it? He did it. What are those bastards that write books? He did it to write a book and sell it and package his brilliant thoughts between two covers, as if he had something to say. He did it as a stunt, let's be honest. Damn those writers. And the thing that I found both absolutely refreshing and completely crazy making was that Chris Knight does not care what we think about him. He did it for himself. He did not take one single note, didn't draw a picture, didn't snap a photo, was going to perish out there, and nobody was ever going to know about his story. And I have never met, it's enragingly pure, but also completely flawed, because he had to commit 1,000 felonies to have a pure life. So nothing fully makes sense, which, by the way, I love. I don't know. Are you the type of people that like to see, the villains have like a swastika engraved on their forehead, and the heroes are like have like a halo on their head? I liked everything in between. Shades of gray are my favorite. So every time I thought about Chris Knight, my little internal sort of radar between, oh, what a menace to society, God, what a sort of personal hero would be at a different spot every day, even to this moment, years after I've written the book. I've asked me how I feel about him, and then asked me 10 minutes later, and it might be different, and I'm telling you the truth both times.
So if we kind of fast forward to the end of the book, we see him, he does his 7 months in jail, and I think they find that, his time served was sufficient. He's sent to his, under kind of strict conditions, he's sent to his mom's house to live, and he works with his brother. He has a little bit of a job, and I think you became worried about him.
I kind of wish Chris was up here. I'd be like, Chris? Yes. Yeah. Sorry, I can't do a Maine accent. Yes. How do you feel about Mike? I don't know what he would say. I liked him for a little while, and then he got too pushy. That's my guess. Nobody handed me a pamphlet with rules for interacting with hermits, 1 through 20. So I had to make it up as I was going along, and I definitely made some mistakes. And I don't know why. When I'm sitting in my writing room and writing, I don't know why I can't, I could have just cut out all my mistakes and made myself look cooler. I knew what I was doing and everything was all smooth and slick, but I don't know why. I feel like my friends like me for my flaws rather than other things. And it's just more personal. So I was like, oh, I missed, I drove by and I thought I saw Chris Knight. I saw his brother. I got him pissed off. But yeah, I interact with humans the way most people do. And I was worried about Chris Knight. He allowed me to see him after he was in jail. And it was possibly one of the most, it was a moving moment when he's sitting under the trees and he starts weeping and saying he can't adjust to society. And I was overwhelmed with emotion too. And I felt like we had a connection, and we were becoming friends, I thought. And then he said, he was thinking of committing suicide. And if a friend says that, that's not something you just say, okay, next subject. How about the Giants? It's like you think about that as a friend. And then it turns out in the end that Chris Knight truly is an outlier. And, I worried about him, and I tried to drive and visit him again, and I kind of messed everything up, but not inadvertently. It was I think it was inevitable that I was, it's hard to put the rules that you use with the most relationships in your life to someone that's an outlier like Chris Knight. And one of the other things I really do admire about him and his story is that, as I mentioned before, he He's not trying to represent anything, but yet in a strange way, one's reaction to his story sort of says a lot about maybe who you are. And again, I really don't make judgments. If you come up to me and says, that guy was nothing but a kind of a homeless guy and a thief and lazy, like, yeah, I can see that. Or this was someone struggling mightily to fit into a society that doesn't have a room for him. Neither of those things are wrong.
I feel like now is the time to ask what I think a lot of people are wondering, which is where is he now? What's been your last contact with him, and what do you know about how he's doing now?
So shockingly, for a journalist, I'm curious. And I would love to. I've been in Maine a bunch of times. I'm literally like fighting my hand for the steering wheel to like, I'm just going to stop by Chris's house and say hi. He clearly, I can't believe he resisted my charms. I mean, come on, who wouldn't? He put up with me and told me to basically get lost. And I love the way he calls my children the Cowboys. Go home to the Cowboys. That the guy who, shirked all his responsibilities is saying, you better be a good father and get your kids some candy and buy your wife some flour. Like these funny advice, but in a funny sort of way, spending all this time with someone who gave up his whole life chasing something that was amorphous that he probably could never catch. He in a weird way, working with Chris Knight made me feel more attached to like my, by comparison, non-extraordinary domesticity and my children and my wife. I loved, I mean, don't get me wrong. I had a beautiful night in this great cabin. Thank you, Blake, if you're watching, and Susan, I appreciate your loaning me the cabin. I had a night I have 3 teenagers, 1 wife, and 2 French bulldogs in my small house. And so I couldn't believe how quiet it was last night. So thank you. But yes, compared to Chris, I didn't do anything extraordinary, but I feel like he was sort of chasing his tail in a way. It's a very, it's again, I kind of like a story that doesn't have it. I wish that I could have like these beautiful bows and tie everything up, but that's for the realm of fiction. This is nonfiction. So there's a lot of empty, unanswered questions. So anyway, the way I left it was, Chris, please, I would love to hear from you anytime. And he said to me, if I want to get in touch, I'll write you a letter. And I said, deal. And it's been about 6 years, and he has not written me a letter. And I have respected his privacy from the time of my nosy reporting ended until now. I've heard not one word from Chris Knight. And I'm going to say right now, I doubt I'll ever hear a word from him again.
Do you think he's read your book?
He must have loved that book. No, so I don't know. Chris, did you read my book? It was great. No, he's a voracious reader. He spoke to me. He knew he was speaking to a journalist. He was very curious about, oh, come on. Of course he read my book. Let's just be honest. And maybe I'm just trying to make myself feel better. Definitely, I'm trying to make myself feel better. But I have a theory. Chris, is this right? I have a theory that if he hated my book, he would certainly have somehow let me know. And I think that the fact that he has not responded to it is okay. I think he found it okay. Now, I also have a little bit deeper insight. This is not pure conjecture. It's mostly conjecture. But in the process of writing the book, also because I need to pay bills, I make my living as a writer. I don't know if I recommend that. He says under his breath. I make my living as a writer. I wrote an article, magazine article for GQ about Chris Knight. Same tone as the book, obviously, like kind of like just like the trailer to a movie. And he did read the article before I met him at his house, and he mentioned that he had read the article. And as I said at lunch today, this was his review of my article. I found it fair. And he continued talking to me after the article came out. So I'm thinking my inner Chris Knight sitting over there to my right, imaginary, he'd be like, I thought the book was fair. I think he gives it a B. Let's go straight B. I think he's going to give it a B.
All right. So let's take some questions from the audience. Couple quick rules. I'll call on folks for our in-person audience. Just raise your hand and I will run to you with the mic because we want our online friends to be able to hear your questions. And yeah, for our online folks, please put your questions in the chat. All right, here we go.
In the meantime, we're waiting for the rest of the people who are still in that roundabout to show up. They'll be here any minute now, I'm sure.
So you mentioned what you called his strange morality, I think. Do you feel like Chris Knight had any sympathy for, any empathy for other people? You know, he had these strict rules. I'm not going to do this, but didn't seem to have any awareness that like even an oil watch could be important to someone. How much do you think he thought about other people?
Thanks for the question, and thanks to everyone for coming on this cold. And it's much easier to stay home and watch Netflix. I'm trying to be at least as good as an average Netflix show. Man, I'm not great, but I think Chris Knight was completely aware of what he was doing. I think he was raised in a really interesting family where it was very clear what was right and what was wrong, and stealing anything was wrong. And I believe that embarrassment and shame was also played a large role in his, I don't think it possibly prevented him from coming back to society, but one of the telling things that he said was right after he was arrested, he didn't know if his parents were alive or dead. It turns out that his father had died and his mother was still alive. She has since passed away in the last couple of years. But one thing Chris Knight said was, please don't contact my parents. I don't want them to know that they raised a thief. And that's both a complicated sort of, it's a very Chris Knightian expression because phrase, because you could feel sorry for him. But again, then he was a thief. There's nothing wrong with like getting a quiet job and living by yourself. There's a lot of introverts out there and they don't steal from other people or they don't live in the woods. And so it was a very weird, I think that he was aware, to answer your question, that people's watches, that even he could say, oh, I only took 2 generations ago Game Boys or stealing books, but he knows that these are personal things and that was wrong. And there was a deep sense of shame. And yet he decided to continue with this in a gentle manner. But of course, nobody knows that the person breaking into your house does. I mean, I would assume that they would have a gun or a weapon. This is not a, this is why I can't, I speak warmly of Chris Knight because I feel somewhat warmly about him, but it doesn't mean that I think that what he did was at all correct. I think that he shouldn't have done that. I think the people of Central Maine and the region, the Central Lakes region were all like, all he had to do was ask me and I would have given him meals. He could, people started hanging things on their doors. I think there was a way to do this that would have been fine by everybody. In fact, so after he was caught, someone offered him a little bit of land and there could have been a fundraiser where he had plenty of food, but there was something about him being a charity case and people knowing. And so the more I talk about it now, just in the back of my head, the more complicated it gets rather than the less. There's like another layer of the onion, another layer of the onion. And so I think we could keep peeling and never quite get to, was this a person who really did the best they possibly, clearly he's an outlier. I hesitate to use the term, had a psychological problem because maybe he didn't. He expressed more pleasure about his life than most people that I talk to out here in the regular world. But then again, he was also deserved to go to jail and was lucky it was only 7 months. He could have gotten 10 years for each felony and 10 times 1,000, carry the one that's 10,000 years. And so I think that what I like I've repeated before, I think one of the things about this story and this book that is at this satisfying and frustrating at the same time is this sort of, we can't really put a definitive statement on anything. Like he had this strict, so yeah, he knew that he was breaking the law and depriving people and allowed himself to do that. And then maddeningly didn't try and say he was right, said, yeah, you deserve to be mad at me. And so, which sort of disarms everything. And so again, more layers being peeled.
All right, let's take a question from our online audience.
I was struck by the idea that he never talked or used his voice for all those years. I think if I were alone, I would talk to myself, sing, etc. Do you think that that was just his personality to be silent, or was it part of being afraid someone else would hear him?
So, I just have to take, Chris Knight had no reason to lie to me about most things. In fact, he was so precise when I started reading back like little bits of his tale. Like I was like, so you threw your keys in the center console of your brat and walked into the woods, and he would be like, no. I didn't throw them. I placed them. I was like, okay, we're going to be that precise. And so when he said, I didn't talk, of course, being the journalist, I'm like, oh, come on, you talked to yourself. No, I didn't. Yeah, you said a few things to yourself. Mike, I didn't. And so, and then like a half hour later, in the interview, this is the way I like to do my, I guess I must be annoying. This is the way I like to do my interviews, where I was like, so you must have talked to yourself a little bit. And he's, I already told you I didn't. So I was like, he was very consistent about that. So I believe that that was his nature, to be quiet. But I'm going to tell you that I spent 5 nights alone at his site in all seasons, and I freaking talked to myself. I caught myself talking to myself like this, and I brought my notebook and pen and took a bunch of photos, and it was close enough to society that I could like listen to the Red Sox Yankees game over my telephone. I was like, and I was like, okay, Mike, now we're gonna not light a fire because Chris didn't like. We're gonna look for charred wood. We're gonna find this. I was literally like, I started talking to myself right away, and I guess that's a sign that I'm not a natural born hermit. These are good questions, by the way. I like this.
I was fascinated by 2 things, particularly that you did in your research work. You talked to a lot of mental health providers, and I really appreciated their feedback in the book and the questionings that you had to them, because I kept asking myself, what's wrong with this guy? And then the other thing I really appreciated, and I'd like you to talk just a tiny bit more about it, was you interviewed some people who were the victims. And this kind of goes to Charlie's question, I think, about did he know what he was doing was wrong? And I felt such compassion for one of the women that you, because she talked about how her family just felt so violated. Years and years ago, when we were raising our kids, somebody broke into our house at night while we were sleeping, and we had young children in the house, and they stole my purse from, I think, the front hallway, and they took my keys to the car, and they stole our car. And the car was found 4 or 5 days later, and the police thought maybe it had been used in possibly a drug raid or run or something. But the feeling and the fear of that violation in our home, especially with kids. So I felt for the people that had their stuff stolen, and the woman that you interviewed. Can you talk a little bit more about the victims?
Right. And I thank you for that question. And, and again, I just really want to express how honored I am. I mean, there are literally like millions of books out there, and that you chose this one is, I do not take that for granted. I can't tell you how fortunate I am that I have the opportunity to sit here, because when I'm writing, I mean, I want to write what I want to read, and I don't like it when writers like paste over things, or make it pretty, prettify something, or try put their fingers too heavily on the scale. And so I wrote the book that I wanted to read, and I'm like sitting here, after talking to the victims, I easily could have cut that out, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I think I'm making Chris Knight, my main character, look terrible. But I also feel for the victims. And like I said, I have 3 children, and we have had, the only time we ever had someone in our house, they literally broke a window and came into our house. My wife is a light sleeper, woke up, freaked me out. We had babies in the house, and it was fortunately a drunk person who was sure that he was in the right house and didn't have the right key and broke a window and got in. That, you got to be really drunk, but seriously, was very rattling. And we have been robbed, but we weren't there. And so like, I feel for that. The victims are absolutely correct to be furious. But one of the things I noticed, I spent I think I did 7 reporting trips to Maine. And one of my favorite things to do was like park my car somewhere near North Pond and just start wandering around like Chris Knight did. And sometimes I would be like, I'd met a few people and they would say, go meet our neighbors, the Johnsons. And I would go and they would I don't think there's anybody without exception who said, oh, come have a glass of lemonade or a beer. Let me tell you our version of the Hermit story. Everybody really wanted to tell it. I mean, literally there were like 3 college papers written about the Hermit by, people who grew up with this. At 27 years is a long time. Literally people who were like, remember their Halloween candy being stolen at age 10, grew up, had kids of their own, and their Halloween candy got stolen. I mean, that is like ridiculous. Like, how is that even possible? And then when the guy, nobody believed that it was one person and this, this North Pond Hermit thing was real. Like I said, when I put the Loch Ness Monster and the Himalayan Yeti down there, it's like, it was that level. Like, obviously there's not one dude that's lived there for 27 years. It's like some sort of bizarre joke, but the reactions from the people in North Pond were just like my feelings, and maybe probably if I polled you all, like all over the map. My favorite ones were the families. It sort of reminded me a little bit. I won't talk about politics tonight, but it's sort of like if you have like a liberal and a conservative that get married, like a James Carville and a Mary Matlin. There were some families like that where the father would be saying, if that guy came into my house and I ever caught him, I would shoot him in the head. And, I was furious at him. And then he would tell his piece. And I remember one family where the father went, I think he went off to work. He had to leave the house. And the wife's like, let me tell you my version. I actually always knew he was gentle and calm. And, I could tell from the first break-in and I wasn't worried at all. And in fact, if I had caught him in the house, I probably would have let him go, and it was like, and I was like, this was fascinating. And so it's like one of the things about Chris Knight, besides the actual story itself, is that he is sort of a weird cipher, as I was mentioning before, for you to host your own, like, sort of insecurities, fears. Like, he's really like this sort of figure that people projected onto. I can't tell you how many theories I heard from people in the pond. I was, one of the questions I asked, so what did you think before who did you think this hermit was before he was caught? It went from like gang of teenagers to DB Cooper, and everything in between. And so many, I mean, what catnip for a reporter to be in this bizarre story where people are inviting me into their homes and everybody wanted to tell me about their hermit version, and no two were even remotely similar.
All right, let's take a question from online.
From Catherine, has anyone ever found the brat vehicle, its keys, or looked up the license plates, registration, insurance, etc.?
Great question. One of the things I told you I wanted to do was say things that weren't in the book. Okay. Remember, he leaves, so Chris Knight drives his Subaru Brat, brand new, by the way. His brother, he felt like very bad about it. Talk about morality. He felt like he owed his brother money. Actually had a very brief interaction with his brother. It was like 27 years ago. He was fine with the Brat being. So what happened to this Brat? Again, I wanted to prove that Chris's story was, I wanted to disprove it. You can't really prove something is true, but you can easily prove that it's false by, like, if I found a fire pit. So I wondered where that car was. I didn't even know where to start looking. A couple of years ago, I got an email saying, I bet you're wondering what happened to that car. And this woman sent me a long article. She's like, my father found a Subaru Brat broken down in the woods, but it looked pretty good, had it towed out. Now, I don't know what happened to the keys. He said that he put them in the console. I'm not sure if over the years, I'm not sure that about this detail, but he tried to contact the owner. I believe that the daughter said that her father either contacted the police or even put an ad in the local paper, and nobody ever claimed it. And he fixed it up and drove it around for many years. And she sent me, the father had passed away, but she sent me her father's, he wrote like a little essay about it. And so the Brat was found, and Maine is sort of like, rural Maine is sort of like rural Colorado. You don't want to let a good car go to waste. And so it was driven around by someone who found this car. in the woods at night, but there's no way that there's two brats out there in the fire. So thank you for asking that question. I meant to talk about that, but I think I got nervous when I sat down here, forgot all my slides and everything I was going to say. Couple more before we release you to the roundabout of hell.
Oh yeah, we got plenty of time.
Hello, I'm in a book club and I selected your book for this next August. And one of the main reasons that I did, besides that it's an amazing story, is once he is back out of jail in the world, you said it was really hard for him to assimilate. But what I found fascinating, and I thought would be a really good discussion point, would be the fact that the people around him in society and his town, they had a hard time assimilating him, and they seemed to put their own slant on everything about him and who he was about and what happened. Does that make sense?
I mean, Chris Knight does upend so many assumptions. What the thing that I couldn't get my head around is like, what do we do in like if you're a criminal, we have jails. If you're clearly have mental illness, we have hospitals and psychiatric facilities. But what if you are none of those things? There's really no place for you in society. Where does a person go who's not, I'll just say that he's definitely had criminal activity, but he's not a violent criminal. And he's, in my mind, maybe saner than many of, than me. Well, I don't want to insult anybody yet. The answer is that we do not have a spot to put Chris Knight. There's no spot. You're out of luck if you don't fit into society and you're not a criminal and you're not insane. There's just no spot for you. You just have to cope with it. And not actually sure what question you asked. Right.
People always try to. Sorry.
You're good. You project. Like
Oh, thank you. People always try to answer the questions, and I mean, it's hard for me to articulate too, but
like label or categorize.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
this is exactly all you need to do is take, this pill twice a day and you're normal. And where Chris Knight would say, well, normal means, like, sometimes I do have like what I call like this, Chris Knight moment where I'm like literally driving in my car. I got two kids in the back, being impolite to me, and I'm listening to the news, and it's like Ukraine and Israel, and I got like, my wife is texting me with like 100 things to do, and I feel completely overwhelmed and harried. And I'm sure that everybody in this room knows what I'm talking about, that sense that society can be overwhelming. And I do have that thought that, it's definitely not, it's not Chris Knight who's crazy. It's like the rest of us. And I think he had that feeling too.
Well, they didn't understand him.
Yeah, he's hard to
There was
understand.
no way that he could ever explain to them, even if he wanted to, what was going on with him. And as an outlier, he was an outlier. So it was just haunting to me that they just couldn't understand it, and they tried to make up stories about who he was, what he was about, but they couldn't even begin to touch on it.
I think that observation is absolutely accurate. And I found it telling also that one of the books that Chris Knight kept in his tent was about circus freaks and physical outliers, Siamese twins, people that are going to be an object of staring. And I think he felt that inside, like a different sort of person. But again, there's nothing that can be done about that. It's a great observation. Yeah, people couldn't get their heads around Chris Knight at all. In fact, to this day. I mean, I couldn't believe the percentage of people who were just absolutely sure that this guy was making up a story. And the only thing that makes less sense than his story is the fact that this guy, who literally does not want any publicity, would make up a story that gave him more publicity than anyone else. Like he, the DA said, this is the most, after Stephen King, this is the most famous person in Maine, and that was the last thing he genuinely wanted. So I can't, I would go to house after house. He's like, oh, that guy just slept inside. He's just making up this whole thing, and I'm like, I'm not paying him any money. He doesn't really want to, like that. That's the story is such a crazy one that the only explanation makes less sense than a story that makes almost no sense. Yeah, there's just some people that he doesn't have the wherewithal to explain himself, and people are never going to get their heads around this story, and I kind of like that.
All right, let's take a question from online.
And then we'll wrap it up.
Okay. Do you know how many books were in his camp?
So Chris Knight, if you recall, this is like a minor scene, but Chris Knight used magazines and books to make, I think did he call them floorboards? He had an expression for that, like floor bricks. I'm trying to remember. So, boy, did I have a weird time in his camp. Not only did I spend like, I'm glad there's not, like, I'm just imagining if someone like had videotaped like the whole thing secretly. Suddenly I'm like talking to myself and like digging random holes, like, some crazy person around this camp. And so I was unearthing National Geographics and bundles of books, but and then I dug this crazy hole in his dump to just like, as like this anthropological thing. I'm like, I got this notebook. I'm like digging garbage. I'm like Cheetos, and I'll write down 1 box Cheetos. Twinkies, 1 box Twinkies. Hamburger helper, 1 box hamburger. Ranch dressing, 16 ounce. And so I'm like doing this, like what I don't know what I'm doing half the time, please. But this sort of like, I felt like I was like a field scientist, but rather than, uncovering dinosaurs, I'm like uncovering, Cheetos and Twinkies. So I did find a lot of books wrapped in duct tape and used as floor bricks. Chris Knight said that he stole during this, thieving seasons, like 50 or 60 books a year times 27. That's more than 1,000 right there. So he read a lot of books and had a very, I think that if you don't have, he said that he didn't, I said, every time he mentioned a book that I had read, he would like, you remember that minor character, this and what he said? And I was like, nope. And I remember saying to him, Chris, I think you have a photographic memory. And I remember exactly what he said. He's like, I don't have a photographic memory. I just remember everything. and then, of course, he had to, again, in his honesty, he's like, if you weren't distracting yourself all day long with your little phone and your videos, and maybe you would remember everything. And I was like, I think you're right. Maybe a couple more questions. I feel like I've overstayed my welcome.
Actually,
give me the this sign if I'm boring you.
Yeah. We're doing okay on time.
Okay. Let's any more hands? And there's a hand back there that I'll let you pick.
All right.
You're getting your exercise, Eric.
Like in the winter, right, Eric? I'm curious, you've obviously written a lot of various stories. If this one has stuck with you more than anything else, or if this is just what we happen to choose and what we've so far happened to have read, and whether this is, a normal response after some of your other things from the crowd, or did Chris strike a particular nerve? And then a follow-up to hers, actually. I'm curious if the answer is yes, it sounds like you've been back to Maine, if you've talked to people and seen a change of attitude either since some time has passed or since your book has come out.
Okay, so to the second part, so I've been to Maine and I do have a lot of friends and acquaintances there so I don't contact Chris, but I sort of keep second degree tabs on him. I will let you know that Chris Knight still lives in town. His mother passed away. The house that he grew up in was sold. He lives in a small apartment in town. He has a friend, it's mentioned very briefly in the book, this woman who went to high school with him who wanted to read the Bible with him. And then I once lightly made fun of him saying, "Oh, you got a girlfriend," and you're like freaked out. Sound like my son who's 16. You got a girlfriend? Anyway, he remains friends with her and has not returned to the woods, although Terry Hughes, who spoke so eloquently about following Chris Knight, every once in a while I speak with him as well. And he's like, "Mike, one day I'm just going to," I can't do a Maine accent, but he has such a great Maine accent. "One day I'm going to call you up and say he's gone again," but he hasn't left the world. And then in terms of this story, yeah, I think this was a very personal thing for me. I really was fascinated about, I mean, two of my favorite things in the world are reading books and camping out. And this is like, I got to interview the world champion of these things. And I remember my friends that I bounced advice off of, and even my editor was like, so Mike, this guy just sat there and did nothing for 27 years. That's the book you want to write? I was like, now that you put it like that, he's like, I don't even know if you got a paragraph there, really. And so the fact that I'm sitting here talking about this, so yes, I mean, there's, I wrote it. The one that became a movie was, of course, A Spectacular Murder, and I've done hijackings, and I've covered, big wars and stuff like that. And so, but for some reason, this was the one this story, and just personally, I felt a little like Chris Knight. It felt like more than a story to me. It felt like I was learning something about myself and embarrassing myself and making mistakes. And it was very personal to me. And I feel like, I'll just admit this to you. I feel like the book I wrote is sort of tucked between the paragraphs. It's really a book of philosophy, but I've just had it has a plot and a crazy character at the center. But really, I think that I hope that people get out of it maybe like, let's think about how much time we need to spend with ourselves. I have this idea that if we're more comfortable with ourselves, then we'll be better people to everyone else. And I also have this other idea that I have completely failed to spread. But I hope, I suggest, let's start with 5 minutes. If everybody in this room, well, no, if there was like some sort of law that everybody in the United States had to take 5 minutes per day in which they did nothing. And I say nothing, keep that phone in your pocket. Don't talk to anybody else. You could do this in the middle of Times Square, or you can do this in Rocky Mountain National Park. Just 5 minutes is a longer time than you think. Go set your alarm to ring in 5 minutes. Put your phone down and do nothing but just be where you are, like in your car, turn off the radio, be in your car, be in the woods, and do nothing for 5 minutes. It is a kind of, I'm not even saying meditate or you don't have to have a mantra, just do nothing. It is amazingly calming. You get to know yourself a little bit. And I just think that if everybody took 5 minutes a day, this is my hope, that the whole temperature of society, which all of us seem pretty observant here, is a little troubling to me, that we all seem to be quick to fight one another when really, I travel around the world, like this country's pretty dang good, trust me on that. We would like society, like the level of sort of vitriol in society might decrease by a crucial 5 to 10% if we all just took a few moments to catch our breath and do nothing. Please, if you really take anything with you when you're driving home and dealing with the construction, if you take anything from this talk tonight, just try and do a couple of minutes. I mean, this is the least onerous request that a person can ever make to you. Do nothing for 5 minutes. Just do nothing. I am just looking around the room and knowing myself and knowing Americans. None of us do nothing. Like I used to say, yeah, I meditate, but I also sleep at the same time. I'm multitasking, get a couple hours of meditation in during the middle of my sleep, I'm sure, in there somewhere. We're all very busy, but so I have kept that. I tried to meditate in India and failed. I'm a failed meditator. Can't do it. But it's really fascinating to just, I get my little Chris Knight moment where I just try and do nothing, and I'm not going to make us do nothing right here together, but I just suggest it. Just try, everybody try it once. If you hate it, be like, Mike, wrong. But I find it to be calming. And I also have this theory that, you know, we're all afraid to get to know ourselves. I'm a little afraid of it. Why? We're really afraid to be alone. Why? I am not sure why, but the better you know yourself and the more you accept yourself, I think it makes me a better father, better person, more fun to be around. It certainly doesn't make me talk less clearly.
All right. I think that's a good place to leave it. Do you want to say a quick word about your latest book? It's about another outlier.
All right. I mean, I'm not here. You know, this is normally I'm doing like a little sales pitchy thing, and I feel like a little dirty about it. Like I got to go home and take a shower. Like I tried to sell. So I'm not. This is a night where I'm not selling anything, but I also am not unproud of my work. To use a double negative, the not unbrown dog chased the not unthrown stick across the not ungreen yard. I remember my English teacher saying. So my newest book it took me only 11 years of work. It's about an art thief. It's called The Art Thief, and it's similar to Chris Knight. It is about someone who is complete outlier. This guy stole $2 billion worth of art and just hung them in his bedroom to admire and have sex with his girlfriend in front of. Was like a master thief and a master aesthete, and thought the rules did not apply to him, and everything comes crashing down. Take it out of the library. My publisher loves when I say that. Just take it out of the library. No, anyway, so that the Art Thief, again, no sales pitch intended. But if you liked The Stranger in the Woods, you might like The Art Thief.
All right. Well, thank you, Michael.
Thank you. At least as good as like a medium Netflix show, you know, drive safely home. It's sort of blizzardy. I think you Estes Park denizens know how to drive in the snow. Thank you all for coming out on a cold January night and listening to me babble. Thank you.
All right. And I have a few thank yous. Hang on just one moment. I want to thank all of you for coming, both our in-person and online audience. I want to thank Barbara Jo for her help with tonight's event and lots of others. I want to thank a generous friend of the library who provided lodging for our guest. I want to thank all of our volunteers who helped us over the course of a number of programs, including Heather, Reed, and Callie. I want to thank the YMCA and their great audio-visual support. I want to thank the One Book, One Valley community for all the One Book, One Valley committee for all the hard work they put in every year. I want to thank Liz for the lawn chairs, Dan at O'Reilly for running back to his house to get this car battery. And I've kind of been going from the proximate to the distant and the individual to the organizational. Last but very not least, I want to thank the Estes Valley Library Friends and Foundation for all they do to support One Book, One Valley and everything else we do. Let's give the friends a hand.